what we've done in society and in the church, we basically institutionalized that dynamic. And that created the what I've affectionately called the victimhood Olympics that we've lived through over the last decade or so, in which people competed to be the greatest victim because the greatest victim wins. The greatest victim was invulnerable to criticism, and their agenda set the agenda for the entire community.
So, welcome to the Coalition for Marriage, Dr. Joe Rigney. Been looking forward a long time to speaking to you, and we'll find out why in a minute. But before we go into that, would you kindly just say hi to our viewers and our listeners?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on, Tony. This is great.
Great to have you on. Now, you are, we were just discussing, I could spend half an hour introducing you because you've got a theological role in a seminary college, you've got a pastoral role, you're an author, you're a speaker, you've got so many things, so many arrows to your bow. And as we're starting off, just in case anybody tuning in wants to know a little bit more about us, Coalition for Marriage is the UK's leading pro-marriage organisation representing tens of thousands of individuals from all faiths and none who support and promote this thing, man-woman marriage. We think it's unique. We think it's really special. We think it deserves its own unique place and shouldn't be combined with other things. Not saying that other things don't exist in a liberal democracy. We're just saying that marriage describes the thing which only a man and a woman can do. And all the evidence is very, very clear that that brings something very, very special to the table. And we don't want to see that lost. So one of the many complex aspects of that whole discussion is something which is going on in society. We talk about toxic masculinity, and also the conversation is emerging around the concept of toxic empathy. You've written a book, The Sin of Empathy, and I just want to emphasize a lot of our supporters are Christians, but not all by any means. And of those who are Christians, they come from a lot of different flavors. But your book, The Sin of Empathy, is excellent because although it locates bad types of empathy in the context of biblical sin, actually it's written in such a way that people of any faith or no faith can get an awful lot from it. So I want to commend people to that book, The Sin of Empathy. Having said that, let's begin right there. What on earth made you write a book of that title?
Yeah, well, years ago, I read a book by Edwin Friedman, who was a Jewish rabbi in the United States, and wrote a family therapist, things like that. He wrote a book called A Failure of Nerve: Leadership in the Age of the Quick Fix. And I found it a very insightful book, not from a Christian perspective, but one that just had a lot of shrewd insights on the way that people work and the way that institutions work and some of the problems that we face in society today. And in that book, he talked about the fallacy of empathy and the danger of empathy for leaders, and basically argued that in highly anxious and reactive contexts like we live in, empathy becomes a power tool in the hands of the sensitive, meaning that out of a good desire to care for people, empathy, when it's kind of untethered from what's true and good, becomes a tool of manipulation, in which institutions and organizations basically reorganize themselves, and accommodate and cater to the most reactive, the most immature, the most unstable members of a community. So he identified that as a problem. I thought it was a very interesting insight, and then felt like I read that probably back in 2010 or 11. And basically the next 10 or 15 years seemed like a conspiracy to prove his point.
Yeah.
And so in watching things play out in the church and watching things play out in the wider culture, began to see this dynamic, and that led me to dig into it more. I began to teach some classes on it, leadership classes in the college I was working for, and then began speaking publicly on it, probably in about 2018 or 2019, and speaking about it in a way that was deliberately provocative. Right, The Sin of Empathy is intended to be a provocative title, provoke some thought, but also provoke some reactions, perhaps, that can sometimes illustrate the point better than an explanation. But that's what got me into it. And so for the last 7 or 8 years, I've written a number of articles and then finally pulled them together, reorganized them, rearranged them into this small book.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a very readable book, and it's a good book, and there's a couple of books around. I think
Ali Beth
Ali
Stuckey,
Beth,
yeah.
yeah, she's written something called Toxic Empathy, which kind of
Right.
picks up the phrase. And for the unread who haven't read either of those books, distinguish the two, could you?
Yeah. Between our two books, yeah. So I would say mine is written more from a kind of a pastoral perspective. It's analyzing things in the church. It's focusing on both the personal and kind of the societal dimensions. Her book is targeting more specifically the political questions. And so she walks through a number of different political issues, abortion, the trans idea, gay marriage, and a number of other immigration, and basically shows how certain slogans are designed to hijack Christian compassion and empathy and manipulate Christians into going along with progressive ideas. So she's more focused on the political, cultural. That's in my book, but I also talk a little bit about the family and the ways that this shows up whenever someone puts you on a guilt trip or a pity party,
Absolutely
and things
right.
like that. So
That's why I really appreciated your book, because it brings out the everyday things that, aside from the big political issues that happen just around the home, around the church, in kind of gatherings of people, that sort of stuff, the everyday thing that just shuts down conversation. So let's kind of, I thought, for people who haven't really thought about this, I thought empathy was a good thing. And especially for Christians, aren't we supposed to be empathetic?
yeah, well, this is all comes down to your definitions, and I think maybe the way into that would be to say, at a base level, if we mean something, if empathy simply means emotion sharing, you feel sad, I feel sad, you feel happy, I feel happy, then I don't even know. It's not even a good or a bad thing yet. It's simply a thing that human beings do. It's a design feature of human beings that we bond over emotions, we share emotions. The question is, what are those emotions, and where do they want to take us? And I think over the last, empathy is a new word in the English language. It was brought over from German in the early 20th century in the field of aesthetics, but then gradually began to be presented as an improvement upon the older virtue of sympathy or compassion or pity. And I think it was presented as a kind of upgraded, compassion 2.0. And I think in exploring what was meant by that upgrade, we see some of the dangers begin to emerge. So, part of the way it was presented as an upgrade is it's a more total immersion in the feelings and experiences of other people. It stays out of judgment. Whereas compassion or sympathy maintained a certain kind of emotional distance in order to be able to help someone. Empathy demands you got to jump in with both feet. And I saw that as precisely the problem. As we do that, if we jump in with both feet when someone is feeling something or someone is in pain, we can lose touch with reality. We can lose touch with what's true and what's good. And that's precisely when it becomes destructive. And one of the lessons I learned, C.S. Lewis is one of my heroes, and in his book, The Four Loves, he talks about the way that human loves, natural loves, the love of your family, love of friends, romantic love, all of these are good things. But when they elevate themselves to the highest place, when they become gods, he says they actually become demons. They become destructive and they destroy themselves and us. So you think about something like mother love, who could be against that, right? And it is a great and beautiful thing that God has given to humanity, the love of a mother for a child. But when God's hand isn't on the reins, when it becomes untethered from what's true and good, it becomes tyrannical, possessive, vampiric. And Lewis recognized this and illustrated it in a number of his books. And essentially, what I've done is try to apply that basic paradigm to our love for the weak and the hurting and the broken, and say the same thing is true here. And it's destructive because it's so deceptive. Who could be against empathy, right? Well,
Oh, yeah,
if, if,
yeah.
if empathy becomes untethered from what's true and good, it does become a tool of manipulation, and one that can leave a lot of destruction in its path.
Yeah, and it's destroying the church that should be standing for something else. And just as an aside, I interviewed recently Dr. Michael Ward, who's the foremost living scholar, perhaps, on C.S. Lewis, and we were talking about Lewis conversations around marriage and his views. And so you're absolutely right. He's prescient, amazing chap, Lewis, and the forethought that he had in kind of diagnosing what was and what was going to affect culture is just astonishing when you look at it. It really is amazing. But you mentioned a phrase, without judgment, and there's the thing. It's almost like empathy. It's like there's a phrase we have in the UK. I don't know if you have it. Kindness to a fault.
Yeah.
And I've often wondered what that means. But actually, we're seeing it all around us. that there's this attitude, and it's within the church as well, that actually whatever you feel, I'm going to sympathize with you and I'm going to entertain those feelings. And not everyone by all means, but there seems to be an awful lot of, well, look, I need to come alongside you and nurture and nurse those feelings that you've got, as opposed to say, well, they might be wrong and that might hurt you. But actually, I think in the book you talk about a lack of moral clarity, a lack of moral judgment. So it's almost as if, well, there is no morality anymore. And this is in the church now. It's actually, if somebody feels deeply about something, that's the only thing that matters. So let's get more specific, and also let's touch on the controversial topic of women versus men in these matters. So first of all, how does this work out? I mean, it's probably an obvious question, right? Because we all know what's going on. But how does this work out in modern life, in the church and outside the church? And we can focus in the church because, like you say, Ali Beth Stuckey and other people deal with what's happening in politics. But you focus on that bit which is supposed to be salt and light, stopping the rate of decay. And it's not really doing it in many places. So what's happening in the church?
Yeah, so I think part of what's happened over the last 10, 15, maybe longer years is that Christians came to live under what I call the progressive gaze, GAZE. The idea is that in a well-meaning, I think, well-intentioned desire to be salt and light, to evangelize our neighbors, particularly our secular, urban, progressive, atheistic neighbors, we began to adapt and adopt progressive sensibilities, share progressive hostilities, try to show that progressive concerns were met by the gospel. And as a result, came to have a little progressive sitting on our shoulder, evaluating whether or not we were good enough Christians. And so we began to filter what we would say, how we would speak about certain things through that grid. What will this offend this hypothetical or imaginary progressive that I have sitting on my shoulder? And as a result, it led us to play up certain sorts of issues as a way of ingratiating ourselves, showing, hey, look, we care about that too. You could think about, I think Christians played up issues of, say, climate change or social justice. And I'm not saying at this point, one way or another, whether that was good or bad, whether we were right or wrong. I'm just saying the reason we did that is we thought that would show we're good Christians. Maybe we have something to contribute. And it also led us to downplay those aspects of the Christian faith that might be offensive to progressive sensibilities. So things like sexual ethics or views of marriage and so forth. And so we muted ourselves in some places, accented certain other things. And over time, what that led us to do is to adopt that standard because we wanted to be seen as appropriately compassionate. So, but compassion was now defined not the way the Bible does, but by the way progressives did, which meant the groups that progressives had compassion for, say minorities or immigrants or the LGBT community or something like that, those groups were worthy objects of compassion, but other groups were sort of neglected. We were blind to them. In our country, that would have been sort of a white working class folks who in 2016 turned out in mass to vote for Donald Trump. They weren't considered worthy objects of compassion under the progressive gaze. I think you guys in the UK have a similar kind of dynamic where perhaps the folks who voted for Brexit and are opposed to mass immigration, well, we don't think about the negative repercussions about them because we're focused on these other groups. And so this is one of the ways actually that empathy becomes dangerous because it's often myopic. It leads to a kind of tunnel vision where certain groups, certain people or groups are worthy objects of compassion, and other groups can be neglected, we're indifferent to them, or worse, we can be cruel toward them because they oppose the objects of empathy. So this is actually one of the more surprising findings. I think even social scientists admit this when they look at the polarization in our society, the tribalism that afflicts us, the divisions. And they say, what we need is more empathy. But they actually discover that when you turn up empathy, you actually increase the tribalism. Because this is one of the things I learned. Lewis taught me this. He says pity, which is a good thing, good emotion, when it's detached or untethered from justice and charity and love, leads through anger to cruelty. Because pity, say, for the oppressed classes, can justify the brutalities of a reign of terror. And so that kind the pity for one group is coupled with hatred and cruelty towards another group. And so I think that those sort of dynamics began to subtly work themselves into the church out of a real desire to, hey, we want to be compassionate. We want the world to shine. We want to shine before the world, like Jesus told us. And so we'll show that we're compassionate. But now that definition has subtly been changed under the progressive gaze.
Yeah, and judgment is taken out of the concept of love. So it doesn't matter that in love, God destroyed the Amalekites. In love, God will say to many on that day, depart from me into everlasting darkness. I never knew you. Right? And these things will happen in love. But that judgmental aspect of love seems to have been stripped within you can understand outside the church that you've got this concept of progressive liberalism and the idea that classical liberalism from a political point of view begins by saying everyone should be able to enjoy their own freedoms unfettered by anybody else. And as each smaller and smaller group assumes that right, you get to the point where the majority have to deny the evidence of their eyes and ears in order for a tiny minority to live their freedom. Yep. And so liberalism just flips into tyranny overnight almost. But within the church, we've got an objective framework that should stop us from doing that.
Yeah. So, the modern notion of empathy becomes very relativistic because it wants to avoid judgment. Other people's feelings have to be affirmed, validated, and celebrated. They can't be challenged, questioned, or rebuked. And I think, and it's the interesting thing about this is when it comes to other passions, all of us have notions of there's good and bad versions. So if we talk about anger, if I'd written a book called The Sin of Anger, everybody
Yeah.
would go, yeah, I know that. And they would
Yeah, yeah.
probably assume, and he
Good
doesn't
book,
mean
Joe.
yeah,
Yeah.
all forms of anger are bad. No, there's righteous anger and unrighteous
Yeah,
anger,
yeah.
or there's holy fear and there's unholy fear. The Bible
Mm,
talks about godly grief and worldly grief. So in most
mm,
other emotions, we have categories for the good and bad version.
mm.
For a lot of people, compassion, pity, empathy is the sort of thing that doesn't have a negative version. And I just think if I'm the devil, where am I going to hide some of my most destructive dynamics? And it's in the place that nobody's looking. And I think this is again one of the things that C.S. Lewis saw very clearly is that pity could be used the wrong way around as a kind of emotional blackmail. Again, think about the pity party. If you've ever had a family member who's exaggerated their hardship in order to manipulate you into doing something you don't want to do, you've been on the receiving end of they're playing on your pity and they're wielding it as a weapon. And what we've done in society and in the church, we basically institutionalized that dynamic. And that created the what I've affectionately called the victimhood Olympics that we've lived through over the last decade or so, in which people competed to be the greatest victim because the greatest victim wins. The greatest victim was invulnerable to criticism, and their agenda set the agenda for the entire community. So if you've wondered, how is it, like you mentioned, that we began to reorganize our entire language, our legal system around this minority population, and one that is very unstable and demented. So I'm thinking of something like the trans movement, but we're going to reorganize all of society around their concerns. How did that happen? And the answer is untethered empathy.
The irony is, of course, if you look at it from a meta perspective, a much higher level, actually, this kind of toxic empathy isn't empathetic at all because it leads to worse outcomes for everybody in the long run. And so it's kind of almost indulgent. It's a bit like this concept of virtue signaling, isn't it? It's more like saying, well, it's about showing how empathetic I am rather than demonstrating genuine empathy, which might be to say you shouldn't do that.
Correct. Yeah, it's actually it's empathy on the cheap because you can signal it. It's in some ways it's like saying be warm and well fed, but not doing anything to help the person. And the reason, it's deceptive because it focuses so much on the immediate feelings of the person in pain rather than their long-term good. So I think true compassion, genuine biblical compassion, is going to look at people as what's good for them in the long run what's good for the society in the long run. It's going to take that into account. And in light of that, try to address the immediate feelings, which might mean saying, hey, your feelings are out of accord with reality, and you need to adjust your feelings to fit reality. But the long-term good is the ultimate goal. Empathy turns that on its head. It loses sight of what's good in the long run. And instead, it just says, whatever we can do to assuage, coddle, relieve the immediate feelings, we'll do it, even if that means uttering falsehoods. Um, and lies, indulging fantasies and derangement. We will do that out of a misguided sense of that's what care and compassion looks like.
We are where we are, Joe, and your book touches on this a bit. So I think perhaps let's try and focus on what's to become of us. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, so I think what's needed is for the church to recover a deep and abiding commitment to the gospel, to the truth, to what is good, and that needs to guide and govern the expression of our emotions and our compassion. So, and that requires a kind of sober-mindedness in our leaders, um, where we're not where we don't put passions in the driver's seat, ours or other people's. Sober-mindedness, right, means it's the opposite of drunkenness. Well, so this would mean don't get drunk on your passions. Don't get drunk on your emotions. Don't get drunk on other people's emotions. That would be empathy. So have a kind of sober-mindedness where you have you're clear-headed. There's a stability and a ballast and a gravity to you that doesn't get swept up in the passions and reactions and agitation of a given moment. But there's a steadiness that comes in, and then it's not passive. It's not reactive. Instead, it's ready to lean in and take responsibility and to say what needs to be said. So there's a need for a recovery of courage to be able to say things. So, I mean, the fact that even the feminists that you were speaking with were willing to say, we're noticing things. We're noticing that these dynamics are very highly destructive. I think there's a need for further press in that direction. I think, an opportunity for us in that regard is when the LGBT movement, for example, has pushed all the way into the trans and is seeking to invade women's spaces. It creates an opportunity to say these things are all connected. And
Mm,
some people, I think that there are certain folks like the TERFs, the trans exclusionary radical feminists, who want to resist the trans thing,
mm,
but they
mm.
want to keep everything else, all the
Yeah,
other
yeah,
advances of the
yeah,
sexual
yeah.
revolution.
Exactly. Yeah,
They want to keep that, and
yeah,
what I think is you guys are trying to be a little bit pregnant,
yep.
and it doesn't work. It's
Yeah,
impossible
yes,
to be a little
yeah,
bit pregnant.
yeah.
This is just what happens when you let our sexual desires off the leash. There's a
Well, so,
reason.
and design, because there's also this concept emerging of side B Christianity, which is
Right.
actually some evil desires are no longer evil.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And you
We need
can
to
live with as long as you don't act on them, you can have those evil desires, and that's okay.
yeah, we've
Just
softened.
don't act on them.
Yes, we've softened our language, and I this is a good example. Like if someone has unwanted same-sex attraction, I feel the same way C.S. Lewis did. He said, I can't imagine feeling anything but compassion for someone in that situation. And so I want to have compassion. I want to help them, but I also want them to learn to put that to death, to resist it, to redirect it in fruitful ways, and not indulge or coddle it by affirming it by calling good evil and evil good. When it comes to these issues, to try to demonstrate to people that there is an inner logic both to the biblical witness on our to our sexuality and to the worldly corruption of our sexuality. That there was a reason our sexual desires are so powerful that that God said, I'm going to tie these down with covenants and oaths made before God and witnesses, because you can't let your sexual appetites run things. And what we said is, well, but what if we take these oaths and covenants and we dispense with them? What if we treat them as just arbitrary things that can be taken or take or leave it, and we remove all the boundaries? And it's like, well, then you get what we have. You get the rampant sexual immorality, sexual chaos that we live in, with all of the casualties that we see all around us. And so we have to go farther back, and we do have to recover that marriage is one man, one woman in covenant with one another for life. That's what God has designed for the fruitfulness and flourishing of the human race.
And it's interesting how, again, I don't want to focus too much on the theology of it, but it's true enough that on the one hand, when God says dealing with the devil and Satan, you fight, you stand and you fight, and with spiritual backing, you're a victor. But when it comes to sexual sins, you flee. right? Don't just get yourself out of there, because it's so powerful. You're going to be in trouble. Flee. But we seem to have kind of changed that. You're absolutely right. And so, well, it's okay. Don't worry too much. As long as you don't, no one's going to mind too much. And we've kind of lost it and losing it there. You mentioned courage, and that's interesting. And I wonder. So I think courage is there too, right? And it's something which I would say is missing in the church. The other thing is vulnerability to being liked, right? So we had politically, October 2018, I think it was, there was an anonymous survey of our members of parliament, and of those who responded, over half said they were too fearful to say what they really thought about LGBT issues. So these are the guys who make our laws, right? Too fearful to say what they really think, presumably too fearful to vote how they really feel, yeah? Because they were scared of the mob. They were scared of being vilified, scared of being deselected because they'll get piled on. Do you reckon that's also the case in the church?
Absolutely. And this is I wrote a book on courage. And both these statements are true. Cowardice is contagious, and so is courage. So cowardice is contagious. You catch it. It's one of the reasons why in the Bible, in the Old Testament law, Moses was told, if tell the troops, if anyone's afraid, send them home, because you don't want them to cause the hearts of their fellows to melt within them. And so so cowardice is contagious. And so when we see that other people are being quiet, then we want to go along. We want to be liked. We want to please people. That's again, and there's an element of that's a good feature. Like, yeah, we want friendships and we want to be liked. That's okay. But when that becomes untethered from what God thinks, we ought to want to please Him first. And so if pleasing God means alienating people, then we ought to please God and alienate people.
And there's exactly the thing. That's right. And so when Jesus talks about, look, whoever loves father or mother or husband or wife more than me, then now he doesn't mean, a lot of people think, well, that sounds awful. But what he means is, if something your father or your mother or your husband or your wife or your child is doing, which is against God, and you love them so much that you're willing to ignore that, that's the problem. Yep, because you're loving them more than you love His law. And that's a significant issue. It's not talking about your emotional feeling for them, but if actually your love for them in the sense of what they're doing outweighs your love of Christ's law, well, that's a big issue. And it makes perfect sense.
That's absolutely right. And so because we want to please people, we'll mute ourselves. But I meant what I said about courage is contagious, because often what you find is all it takes is one person or two people or a few people to say out loud what many are thinking, and all of a sudden people feel like they're not as alone, they're not as isolated, and therefore they can say, that I think that too. I recognize that.
But also the point you made, compassion. There, but for the grace of God, go any of us.
Right.
And it really is compassion, love in the sense of I seek your best, and I seek your best doesn't mean I'm going to endorse what you're doing if it's actually clearly not good for you.
That's right. And so true compassion always reserves the right not to lie, not to blaspheme, right? So you can say, I can follow you into the suffering, but I can't follow you into the sin. I can't join you there. And and I think that people really need to recover this courage, to say out loud what's true, to name things, because I think we've lived for so long. The last 15, 20 years have been a time in which people have gone along with falsehoods for social approval or social cohesion. And all it will take, the emperor has no clothes. And to be able to say, but that's not true, to be able to name dynamics that people have been avoiding and refusing to name, whether it comes between the sexes or about various other societal issues, to just say it out loud and say, no, this is true. Our commitment is to the truth. And then we're going to have our emotions come along and conform to what is true and what is good. That's the way that God wants us to live.
Yeah. And if anyone's in any doubt about what the Bible says about cowards, go and look it up. It isn't pretty.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, that in itself is a great encouragement to do something about it. And again, I apologize for those who aren't Christians listening in, but we are told to pray for pastors and for leaders in the church and for leaders in the country, and we must do that. But pray that they would have courage, pray that they would have grace, pray that they would speak out, that that they would have the ability to do these things, because it's not easy, right? And it's not easy to stand up and get vilified. It's not easy when your income is coming from this group of people in front of you, and if you alienate them and they all go away, you're a public failure and you've got no money to live. It's not easy, right? I get that. So
Right.
we need to lift them up and hold them up. And people like you as well, I would add to that list, Joe. I appreciate your book. I know you probably had an awful lot of kickback from that book, because you
Yes.
will have done, because this is the world we live in, right? The
Right.
kind of the areas you and I work in, they come with baggage, right?
Right.
But great that you've done what you've done. Anything else you're working on that might be relevant that you can talk to us about?
Nothing in this vein. I've got some other projects on C.S. Lewis and things that'll be coming out in the next year or so. But for now I'm really focused on Sin of Empathy and then its companion book, Leadership and Emotional Sabotage, which is sort of the more positive prescription for this problem. So Sin of Empathy identifies it, Leadership and Emotional Sabotage shows how to lead through it.
Sin of Empathy, because you also got lots of references in there. It isn't just you talking off the top of your head. You ground it in lots of statistics and references, and like any sound book would do. So well done there. It's a great book. I recommend everyone go and read The Sin of Empathy. And Joe Rigney, great. Carry on the fantastic work, and I'm so pleased that you gave us just a little time to talk to us today.
Appreciate it, Tony. Thanks for having me.